Abbiamo in linea l'onorevole Olivia Savvas, member del Parlamento del South Australia. Buon pomeriggio, Olivia. Thank you for coming on to Radio Italia Uno.
Thank you for having me.
I'm wondering, maybe you understood some of what I said there in the introduction. Is that correct?
A small amount. So I studied Italian from reception till year 11, and my partner's Italian, so they speak mostly Italian at home. So I certainly pick up on bits and pieces.
Very good. Well, that could be a very good segue into talking a little bit about the importance of language and languages, which is also something that falls within the responsibility and authority of state government, state parliament.
So I'm particularly passionate about continuation of language. I, like so many other South Australians, have a migrant story. My grandparents are from Greek, Austrian and Serbian backgrounds. And as I mentioned, my partner is Italian. So there's a whole lot of languages going on in my household and in my family. But also I studied Italian through school, and then I studied French at university. So I have a real passion for language, and my sister actually studied the Italian diploma at Flinders University when that was under threat. So we were particularly excited and proud to hear just a few weeks ago that the government was committing to $1 million over 4 years to continue the program between Flinders and UniSA, so that language can continue. I think it's so important not just to continue language, but it also it contributes to the continuation of culture and allows us to sort of I guess the generation that are the grandchildren of migrants now to keep on that culture as our grandparents pass on, and to keep on those traditions that are really important to us as we become adults and start our own families.
Yes, important. In fact, the Premier mentioned this commitment at the Festa della Repubblica event just a couple of weeks ago that was held between the state government and the consulate, the government of Italy. Yeah, so important elements is think about the language. So there's cultural elements in terms of intergenerational communication, being able to communicate between parents, grandparents, and children. There are also benefits in terms of international trade and doing business. Whenever companies go abroad, especially Australian companies, the biggest risk, the biggest errors happen when they don't understand or don't engage with the cultures of the other countries where they try to do business with. So important elements. It was interesting. I was impressed to hear that you did Italian from reception through to year 11. So there must have been some element of choice on your part.
Yes.
And then you studied French at university. So that's very impressive. Susan Close, I think, studied French as well. So maybe
she did, and we occasionally chat in French in the hallways. But we've also got a French member of the catering staff in Parliament House, and he only speaks to us both in French to help encourage the language to continue. My French isn't as good as it was, but I often tell the story of traveling through Europe as an 18-year-old and then again in my early 20s. And everywhere you go, you'll notice that Australians are the only ones who don't seem to have a second language. If you go to stay in a hostel or go to sort of the tourist attractions, people are always asking, how many languages do you speak, to find an alternate method of communication. And having a little bit of Italian and my university French set me apart from all my friends, because none of my friends had another language at all. And without that, I honestly think we would have found it very difficult even just to travel.
Yes, indeed. That was interesting. On one trip when I was in Spain, we ended up with some friends communicating via French, which was second or third language for each of us. So it was quite interesting to follow that up. Well, and the question of how languages are taught and maintained in schools is interesting. I understand that in Victoria, languages are compulsory from early childhood through to year 12, which certainly helps to maintain these positive elements that we were talking about. And as I said, we're very happy to hear that the state government is contributing to Flinders and UniSA Italian programs. So maybe in South Australia we can have something like that coming up soon.
Well, I'd be very supportive of anything to continue language. I think the difference in the education of a language at high school and primary school, it's not comparable. At primary school, you know, lots of colours and numbers and that sort of thing, but you don't really get a grasp of that language until probably year 9, year 10, and, you know, not sort of into that conversational level until about that age. So I'm certainly supportive of continuing language, and maybe I'll have to have some discussions behind the scenes.
That's cool. Looking forward to that. Now, you are the member for Newland. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your electorate. What part of the city or the state does it cover?
So Newland is an entirely metropolitan electorate, entirely within the city of Tea Tree Gully. So we have the suburbs of Modbury, St Agnes, Modbury North, Hope Valley, Fairview Park, Banksia Park, Tea Tree Gully, Ridgehaven, and Yatala Vale, which is a small peri-urban, I guess, suburb with some quite large blocks. So it's a metropolitan seat. It's what they often call the government seat because it follows the government every election, wherever the government may fall. And there has been, so last election it was a Liberal electorate, but before that it was Labor alongside the government with Tom Kenyon. I was a councillor in the city of Tea Tree Gully before I was the member, and I've grown up in the city of Tea Tree Gully and live in the electorate now.
St Agnes, so that's where the Baniashkent or Italian village is located. But I understand that they were just vineyards when they started building the facilities there.
Yes, I believe so. Most of Smart Road, which is right where I live, was sort of, I guess, rural at the time. And the Italian Village, as it was called, is where I did my work experience as a Year 10 student at St Ignatius College. I spent 2 weeks volunteering at Bene, and I had the best time. I remember learning Italian songs and dances sort of in the big room that they had there, and helping at lunchtime, and it was just a wonderful community, and I still have some involvement with some of the people on the board and the facility there.
Excellent. So now you said you were a councillor before coming into politics, so you've probably had a long interaction with public policy in the public sphere. Actually, last week we spoke to the Deputy Mayor of Unley, and councils nowadays do a lot more than rates, rubbish and roads, as it used to be the slogan. But are there particular areas or portfolios of interest that you are pursuing or think you would like to pursue?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess I have a real heart for multicultural affairs. As I said, having such a multicultural background myself, my mum also, when she remarried, married a half Swedish, half Dutch American. So my dad remarried a Russian Kazakh woman. So there's a huge number of different cultures in my life, and it's always been that way. So always had, I think, a real heart for multicultural affairs and the importance of that. And my partner's also been very heavily involved in the Italian community for many years. So I get to see a lot of that as well. I guess as well, I've always had an interest in industrial relations. I worked in unions like many Labor members have done in the past. But when I was at uni, my focus was actually criminal law. So did a number of criminal law clerkships and internships, and I interned with the then Minister for Corrections and looked into correctional reform. So lots of different, I guess, pieces that interest me in all different sections.
I might have to pick up on that industrial relations background, because one of the Italian names I saw on the King's Honours list from South Australia was John Camillo, who used to be State Secretary of the AMWU. I'd like to chat to him if he agrees. Maybe you'll need to, if you can help me get me to him, it would be fantastic.
I'm sure I can get you a contact.
Yeah, yes. So, well, now let's have a short break for some messages from our sponsors, and we'll come back to speak to Olivia Savvas here on Radio Italia Uno, Adelaide. So just before the break, we talked about industrial relations a little bit, and you mentioned money set aside by the government for Italian language at the tertiary sector. We just had a budget yesterday, and by the way, we will be speaking with Stephen Mullighan in hopefully in a couple of weeks' time. But are there any particular items in the budget that you've found particularly interesting?
So it's a huge budget, and of course there's a large number of commitments in lots of areas. I think one of the ones that's really important is a huge investment in the school breakfast program, so providing extra resources to local schools who provide breakfast to kids before school. I know that lots of the schools in my electorate have come to me over the last few months saying that they're struggling to be able to fulfil the demand. Obviously, a lot more kids are coming to school hungry than they used to with the cost of living. So
yeah,
that's a really...
I was really surprised and stunned to find out about that. I was talking to a teaching student who did her practical experience, and she said if we didn't give them breakfast, they would be useless, that they couldn't pay attention in the whole morning. But I was stunned that it was a substantial issue. So I'm pleased to see that we're doing something about that.
I don't know if it's all cost of living or if it's just a time thing. People are really, really busy and running to get your kids dressed and out the door. Perhaps people just aren't committing the time to sit down and have breakfast with the kids as well. But I think the really big one and what will be sort of our landmark commitment of this budget is, of course, for first home buyers. So yes. Myself, I benefited from the first homeowners grant a couple of years ago. I got my $15,000 to get into the property market. And not coming from a family with a lot of money, I don't know that I would have had the opportunity to do so had I not received a little bit of assistance. So, of course, we are continuing the first homeowners grant, but also scrapping stamp duty for first home buyers for building homes or purchasing new homes, which is a huge commitment to assist with getting into the property market. In addition to that, we've also worked with Home Start to provide a low deposit loan for those individuals building or purchasing a new home. And that low deposit loan will be as little as 2% with Home Start for those who are eligible to apply.
Okay, I'm particularly impressed that these benefits are going to new homes or construction of homes, because typically the gut reaction of governments is to give money to buyers just to purchase a home, and that has no beneficial impact, just drives up the prices. So that's a bugbear of mine. I'm an economist by my first training, and all economists complain about that. It happens everywhere in the world, but this is good. It's a much more nuanced approach, and I'm very pleased to hear that the stamp duty elimination is going for new builds. Excellent. So
we don't want more competition in the housing market. We've got enough competition as it is. We've released the biggest land release in South Australia's history, with up to 25,000 blocks of land where houses can be built. But we know, just as you said, that just giving those money for people to buy established homes just increases competition and actually makes it more inaccessible for first home buyers or young people or people without a huge deposit behind them to actually access the housing market and get out of the rental market. And we know that there's such a crisis in particularly the rental market at the moment that it's actually, that would have a negative effect. So to build those homes, hopefully in those new blocks of land that are being released is the goal, without adding to that competition in the existing home buyer market.
Excellent. And as you're saying, coming out from, maybe not necessarily come from wealthy families, it's hard to get a deposit up. And the way property prices have gone in the recent years, it's extremely difficult. And especially if you have a debt from the university. Now, I didn't have that, so I don't know what it was like, but I can imagine that starting off with a negative balance sheet, it doesn't make you feel really good. Even though I do like the policy of having the HECS.
I like the policy too, but my HECS debt when I left uni with a double degree and a diploma was close to $100,000. So, you know, to pay off that as a regular person who was unable to make upfront repayments to go to university, that takes a very long time. So to try and access the housing market at the same time, particularly for young people who haven't entered the market before, is difficult. And it's something that I get contacted about a lot in my community. So very, very welcome addition of the budget. Yes,
it's very good. So, so a budget that I guess focuses more on human services, social services, rather necessarily than the business sector, but it's the education and the housing market is very important actually, and releasing the land is helpful because it's the supply side that where you get those benefits. Cool. Well, now you said that your seat tends to go with the governors, and you're right. And yeah, Tom Kenyon, Richard Harvey, now yourself. What's the notional margin that you have?
So at the moment, we're sitting at 5.4 is our margin. Pre-election on the new boundaries pre-election, it was 0.001. So the vote margin was about 54 votes. So in theory, you needed 27 to change the seat and hopefully on our side change the government with that. So no pressure. But it was, the most marginal seat in the state pre-election. It's not anymore, touch wood, but yes, it was the state's most marginal seat.
That reminds me, Vinnie Ciccarello's seat was the most marginal at one stage, and it always took about a week before her seat could be declared. The demographics might have changed there now, and some boundary changes. Cool. Well, again, thank you very much to Olivia Savvas. We've been meeting you a few times now. We see you at the Italian events and others. Actually, the first time we had a conversation, you gave a bit more background. So, okay, I recognize the name as having been Greek, but you located some of the family in parts that might have been Italian or whatever. You said there was a roaming element to the family.
So on my mother's side, my great-grandmother, my Oma, she was actually a Roma person who lived in the Tyrol between Austria and Italy. Her background was Serbian, but they lived between Austria and Italy. And she married my great-grandfather, who was Austrian, and he was believed to have had Italian background as well, of some description. And so they both claim to have some Italian background, but weren't necessarily clear on how. But my opa, who passed just a few months ago, we went to his house to obviously look at pick up his possessions and things. And there was a photo from the early, maybe the 20s. And on the back, it said, so-and-so born Italy. So we have now a picture of a relative born in Italy and the year that they were born there. So it was always we weren't quite sure, but now we've got written proof and a photo of our Italian heritage a few generations back.
Okay, so you've got a few generations of history. We'll need to figure out how you get from Tyrol and Austria to Greece, but maybe we can discuss that another time.
Greece is the other side. That's my dad's side.
Okay, the dad's side. Cool. Okay, well, thank you very much, Olivia, for coming on to Radio Italiano Adelaide, and well, best wishes for your for a longer career in politics. This is your first term in Parliament, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me.